In Lamentations, we read, "But this do I call to mind, therefore I have hope." In Echa Rabbah, a midrash about the book of Lamentations, they compare this to a king who took a woman as his wife and he made for her a grand ketubah. And in the ketubah, he said, "This is what the chuppah will look like. This is what I'm going to give to you. This is how I will lavish you." And then the king went on a long journey, and he was gone, and she longed for him. As days went by, weeks went by, months went by, her friends and family began to come to her and said, "It's time for you to move on. He's not coming back." And when that happened, she would go and she would read her ketubah, and she would see, "This is the chuppah I will make for you. This is how I will lavish you." And she held on to her hope. Finally, after a long amount of time, the king returned, and he said to her, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that you waited for me all this time. How did you do it? How did you hold on?" And she said, "Every time I despaired, I looked at my ketubah, and I had hope." The rabbis compare this king and this woman to us, the people of Israel, and our king. And they say that when non-believers come to us and say that we should stop believing that our God has abandoned us, that the Shekhinah is no longer here, that we come together and we open up our ketubah, our Torah scroll, and we are comforted. And that one day God will come and say to us, "My children, how is it that you stayed by my side all this time?" And we will say, "It's because of our ketubah, because of our Torah that you gave to us, this promise, this hope. But this do I call to mind, therefore I have hope." A few months ago, we had a program on racial justice with Professor Lester Spence, who is the professor of political science and Africana studies at Johns Hopkins University. Amidst the conversation, he asked me, "When you worked on Amendment 4, were you hopeful?" He was making a point about why we do social justice work. We do the right thing even when we feel like it's hopeless. We work towards voting rights, even though we've been working toward voting rights since the foundation of this country. We work to fight anti-Semitism, even though in every age we have confronted anti-Semitism. We don't allow ourselves to be silent, even though these things were, are, and probably will continue to be. He was making a point similar to one made by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he taught, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" And there comes a time when one must position themselves in a place that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular. But one must take it because one's conscience tells oneself that this is right. Professor Spence was saying, we do this because it's right, even if it feels hopeless. "Were you hopeful?" he asked me. I laughed and said, "I'm a Jew. Of course I was hopeful. That's all we have." Pharaoh may have started Jew hatred, but in every age we have seen it. It has enslaved us, murdered us, jailed us, made us homeless, robbed us, vilified us, dehumanized us, gassed us, beaten us, and also surprised us and broken our hearts. But we're here. We are here because we have hope. We have always had hope because of our ketubah, the Torah. We are, each and every one of us, a part of a story that is thousands of years old, that is not done being told. We are not just part of the story, though. We are the heroes of the story. It's a story about living in the image of God, about fulfilling a promise. It's an infinite love story about building, about justice, about mercy, about yearning. And the theme of the story is hope. Let's look back on one of our stories. The Exodus has gripped human imagination, inspired movements, and even Disney films. We tell the story in our daily prayer service. We relive it once a year. So what is this story? It's the story of a people who were enslaved and degraded and oppressed, and somehow, through a series of miracles, both human and divine, we were able to begin that long walk toward freedom. Our rabbis tell this story as a moment that takes them from Mitzrayim, from Tsar, a narrow place, to the Midbar, a wide open expanse, from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from grief to celebration, from degradation to dignity. It moves us. It makes movements. It's the language of revolution, the language of love, the language of yearning. This story is the mantra of the Jewish people because it was never just about what happened to them. It's always about what's happening to us. And it's never about only what happened then, but always about what is happening now. Rabbi Sharon Brous says that we have this constant telling so that we will have the muscle memory of hope for moments like the ones we're living in right now. We need hope the most right now. In fact, the story is the closest thing we have to the genetic transmission of hope because it tells us that even though times are painful and hard, we will survive this. That our story doesn't end here, and that we, like those who came before us, will come out of the other side of this plague of darkness, and when we do, we will grieve and we will rebuild. Hope, cry out, make God listen. Even in our enslavement, we had the power to change the story. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches, only beings who can imagine a world other than it is are truly free. And if we're free, the future is open, dependent on us. We can know the beginning of our story, but not the end. He contrasts Jewish civilization to that of the Greeks. The Greeks believed in fate, the future determined by the past, where the Jews believed in freedom. There's no evil decree that can't be averted. The Greeks gave the world the concept of tragedy. The Jews gave the world the concept of hope. He says to be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Every ritual, every mitzvah, every syllable of the Jewish story, every element of Jewish law is protest against exceptionalism, resignation, or the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against a world that is in the name of the world that could be, should be, but is not yet. There is no more challenging vocation. Throughout history, when human beings have sought hope, they found it in the Jewish story. But I'm not just a Jew. I'm an American Jew. America is a country built on hope. While we usually only sing about our spacious skies and our amber waves of grain, I want you to listen to a few lines from Catherine Lee Bates's Hymn for Our Country. The first verse says, God shed his grace on thee, America, America. May God thy gold refine until all success be nobleness and every gain divine. Another verse says, O beautiful for pilgrims' feet, whose stern impassioned stress, a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. We sing about mending our flaws, about establishing the law of liberty, about working toward divine goals, not self-serving ones. Our forefathers started this country not knowing what it would look like. They wrote the Declaration of Independence knowing it was imperfect, but using lofty language, inspiring language. They painted the vision, as the Torah does, of a place that had never existed before, one where all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They said to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. This is why Bates says, in what has been called the Hymn for America, that we need to plead for God's grace. This is why she called on us as a nation not to be arrogant or to live with a sense of false exceptionalism. But instead, she taught us that we must be willing to admit and mend our every flaw, to move in self-control, not rashness, to work toward the greater good, to believe that we can do better, that we can build a country that is more just, more free, that we can change. Our founding fathers were far from perfect, but they wanted to build something bigger than themselves, bigger than that moment in time. They were starting a story that too hasn't ended, and they were inspired by our book. Another story from our book. The Jewish story begins with God's call to Abraham to leave his land, his birthplace, his father's house, and travel to a land that I will show you. 7 times God promises Abraham the land, and yet he only gets this teeny plot to bury his wife. His story ends, and then Jacob comes, and they are exiled to Egypt, and the book of Genesis ends with the promise unfulfilled. We pick it up in Exodus. Moses trying to lead us to freedom, lead us to that promised land, and we think that we're going to get there. It's only a few days' journey, but 40 years later, we still haven't made it. We end the Torah with this heartbreaking scene of Moses looking out and just getting to catch a glimpse of the promised land that he doesn't get to enter. The Torah ends with us not having entered the land. And the Tanakh, too, ends in the book of Chronicles with us in exile. And so 2,000 years later, when we are finally in our promised land, building the state of Israel, what do we choose as our national anthem? We choose a song of not having arrived yet, a song of longing and yearning, the Hatikva, the hope. So for us as Jews, the ending is always beyond the visible horizon, with just a glimpse of the land not yet reached, a future not yet realized. This is why the image of passing down the Torah from one generation to the next is so powerful, because it's not over. That grandparent, that parent, and that child, they are all co-creating our story. Rabbi Sachs points out that Judaism is the only civilization where its golden age is in the future, in the Messianic age. The best is yet to come. In this moment of despair, Judaism says, we've got this. But to prove it, let me take you again back a few thousand years to a different culture this time. In Babylonian myth, the gods possessed a mighty book, a set of stone tablets called Tup Simatu, the tablets of destiny. Whichever god were holding these tablets would have control of heaven, the reins of heaven in their hands. At Mount Sinai, God hands us the tablets. We are in the driver's seat. Our books and our lived experience remind us of our tremendous power, of our hope. Our books and our lived experience, they tell us that in every age we have hope to tap into. The hope that there shall be no needy. The hope of a country being led by capable individuals who fear God, trustworthy individuals who spurn ill-gotten gain. Hope for the end of fear and hate and xenophobia that drives us far from one another. Hope that every child will be educated and cared for. Hope that the sick receive health care and be healed. Hope that the poor be protected and uplifted. Hope that all who want to vote are counted. Hope that men turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Hope for a democracy that protects the rights of everyone. Hope for a country where the powerful seek to serve and not be served. Hope that we are truly one nation, indivisible, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Hope. It is no coincidence that so many Jews run non-for-profits, that so many are economists fighting poverty, doctors fighting disease, or lawyers fighting injustice. We are a people who refuse to accept the world as it is. Our hope drives us to change the world, because hope in Judaism is not a feeling, it's a verb. It's nachshon, walking into the sea, singing, Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai. It's Rabbi Baumgard opening up our campus to the community to offer basketball in a time where Jews were banned from country clubs and white nationalists shot our sanctuary. Hope is that crazy divine power that God gave us to change things. So I want to leave you with a challenge. One that will let me be hopeful. It comes from a nice Jewish boy, the author Jonathan Safran Foer. When he was speaking this year at the Miami Book Fair, he was talking about climate change and about how we can know everything and we can cry and be sad about everything, but it doesn't matter unless we actually change our behavior. And he challenged his listeners, how are you going to change the way you live your life because you care about saving the planet? How will you change the way you live because you care? Because you believe in a better world? Because of your hopes? So I want to challenge you today. How will you change the way you live your life because of your hopes? What sacrifices are you willing to make this year to make that vision of a better world? What are you willing to do, especially when it's uncomfortable? We can use the hope that has been repeated to us in every holiday, every prayer service, and every Torah study. We can continue to work as our ancestors did so many years ago to build a society that is the antithesis of Egypt, the opposite of the pain and degradation we experienced. And we can build a society that is counter to the injustice and oppressions and indignities of the world that we are living in right now. We can build a world rooted in justice and in peace and in equity and in dignity and love. As Jews, we hope. Don't let us down. The story isn't over, and you are the hero we've been waiting for.